Inside joke. I won't give any more details on that. That's for sure. Not while I'm recorded. I'll be right back.
Hi, everyone. Good to see folks again. Welcome, everyone. Hi, Marissa, Daniel, hi, Bridget, Aaron, Alexis, Matt, Dawn, other Aaron. I think we have a third Aaron if everyone shows up again. There we go. Aaron Shea. On time. Just give it like another minute or two to keep letting folks get on the call. Okay, why don't we get started? Welcome, everyone. It's good to see folks coming back. I was thinking about how, like, we don't have a ton of meetings together. Very first meeting we had, I don't think I knew anybody, which is like a good thing. And now it's like, oh, there's familiar faces. So that's I'm taking joy in that. So glad to have folks back. This is the Pack Tower Working Group. This is the Pack Tower Working Group. This is our fourth meeting. As we typically do, we'll go through the process, and I'll say here at the outset, this is our last meeting as this group for right now. We'll talk a little bit about next steps, but I know we've been having conversations on our side of things and Jim around making sure to keep the momentum of some of the participation of this group in what happens in the ever after. But for this particular process, this is our last meeting together. Today we'll show an agenda here in a second, but we have organized this whole process of this meeting cadence around building around sort of these like really critical um, talking points or or themes as it relates to the goal of this particular effort to identify housing program models, service arrays, and operation costs for the quarters buildings of Pacific Tower. What's going to happen after this meeting and through the next bit of this timeline is the preparation of a final report. In today's meeting, we'll talk a little bit more about that final report, talk about the structure, some of the components, and most importantly, to show everyone sort of how the conversation and feedback of all of these meetings funnels right into that final report so folks can see that direct linkage. And we got a little bit of information this past week about sort of what happens once the final report gets submitted and, you know, goes to the Department of Commerce and things like that. So we can answer those types of questions. But before we get to the final report, we want to do sort of a covering sort of the process and the progress that we've had to date, and then get into a little bit more specifics and questions as we kind of have done each time. So hopefully that is all going to be very familiar to folks, and the participation of this group has been really excellent throughout all of these meetings. So I'm looking forward to hopefully something very similar. As I mentioned, so just welcoming as folks are coming in, really brief touching on that purpose and process as we've done in past meetings, covering sort of the reflection of what we've heard as we've also done in past meetings. This one is a little bit longer and bigger than the other ones because we've heard more and more and are trying to capture all of that or hold all of that. And then we want to talk a little bit about sort of like, let's call it the translation of everything that we've heard into some set of recommendations, and that's still going to continue to be developed, but we want to talk about that as that makes its way into its final report. Then we wanted to have a really brief conversation that feels like it was an important thing to do in this moment, which is, you know, we've talked a little bit about things are out in the future, sort of like the actual what's going to happen with the quarters buildings is a little bit still like to be determined, but wanting to go through an exercise of helping ultimately the legislature, I try and get a sense of, well, what should be the priority if you know, if we're thinking about sort of the phases of all that it'll take to get to a fully operational campus that supports youth and young people, as we've talked about. Then we'll talk about the final report, and then hopefully we have a little bit of time to just sort of like acknowledge all the good work that this group has done and all the participation, and talk about what's next. So with that, we are, the facilitation team is a mix of BDS Planning and North Star Advocates. BDS Planning really supporting North Star Advocates on this contract. I'm Ishmael Nunez. I'm joined by Melody Garcia and Milay Tang, and we have Jim Theophilus and Aaron Hathaway here as well, all folks helping to make everything go. You'll hear several of us speaking in today's meeting. Really briefly, again, as we've shared in the past, if you'd find yourself, especially in logging into this like webinar type of format, if you'd like to adjust what your name is or how your name is written or presented, or you want to add your inclusion of your pronouns or anything else that you'd like to do, you can do so by hovering over your own image and hitting the drop down menu in the top right corner and selecting the rename button. So you can add any other information that you might normally actually have in some of your Zoom meetings, but not in this particular one as you got logged on. We have been, I would say this group has been really excellent in sort of upholding these norms of like really active participation, speaking from lived experience, making this a space where folks are validated for their experiences, and allowing folks to be vulnerable and keeping that a safe space, and as having, just as I said, really good active participation from across the members, listening respectfully, asking questions, etc. So let's keep that energy up and momentum as we have done in the past. As a really brief reminder, again, what we were just discussing. This group is convened to help support the development of a programming plan for the utilization of the quarters buildings at the Pacific Hospital Tower campus. Three specific directions or charge as set out by the legislature as to for the inclusion in this plan is around housing program models, service arrays, and estimates of operation costs. We've talked about and touched on all of those things and want to present some of that back to you all today. And that this is ultimately a report that is authored essentially by this. It's all the content is coming out of this process and this group. We will, the facilitation team along with North Star will sort of organize that into a final report. It will go to Commerce and then onto the legislature. And then, as Jim has mentioned several times, begins a cycle of trying to go out and get the funds and the other things that are necessary to make this all go. As I mentioned at the outset, this is our last meeting of this process. I'm positive that folks will probably continue to be convened or brought in some way or another for conversations as this work continues to go over the next probably likely couple of years. So today we want to do a review of the engagement of what we've heard and then start to tee up this final report piece. So hopefully all of that is familiar. And I will pass it over to Mile to walk us through a reflection of what we've heard so far. And I can hit the next screen whenever you want me to.
Perfect. That sounds great. Yeah, so we just really wanted to provide some reflection on what we've heard so far so we can really tailor that to our next conversation around the recommendations and the other discussions. So we're just going to give a refresher, and at any point you have any questions or clarification, please feel free to unmute and let me know. Go ahead and go to the next. So the very first meeting, we talked a lot about needs and gaps, and a big conversation was overemphasis on most vulnerable. So really, not always is there a focus on the whole spectrum of people. So, and that was something that folks brought up. Also making sure that the services programs are developmentally and age appropriate needed. And also lack of institutional and provider coordination. Another gap was lack of communication and awareness. Also, proximity to services is important. So where are young people getting services? Where can they get them, and making sure that they're accessible with this. And also the question, that was brought up was, how can Pack Tower be a regional or statewide solution? So really as a hub, as a pilot to really show, how does this work? And then as we thought about those things, we jumped into meeting 2, and we began to see that there were various buckets as far as, what these housing models and services would look like. So the first one, we talked about residential and housing. So really the 24/7 staff versus partially staffed, what does that look like? And we had a long conversation, thank you to the young people, about peer advocates. What does that mean? Paid peer advocates, and how does that impact the culture and the services for the young person? Also a space for families. So young people with children, really having that space be available. And then the second piece was really talking about office-based, shared versus permanent. So Away Home Washington is a full-time office space there. And you also have part-time services offices, so such as Treehouse, LCYC, that provide, various pieces around legal issues. And then also really talking about medical providers. Last time we heard a lot about, medical providers coming in, but also having that piece where young people could possibly be the first point of contact, and really doing being the conduit with the medical provider. And then the last piece we talked about was really that enrichment versus campus culture. So community room, library, art room, cooking classes. So a lot of programming for young people to really go to the next phase and really develop themselves. And meeting 3, we talked about synergy and costs. So what does this look like, right? We're really trying to narrow that down. And again, we heard a lot about the full-time paid peer advocates and really being supported by professionals as needed. So for example, if someone is coming out of a treatment center or is first coming in, they would be responded to or welcomed by a young person and as needed, a medical health professional. And the next thing we talked about was a livability toolkit and workshops. So really having tools and programming and classes are educational for life, and also having workshops around that. And youth engagement team chosen by the youth, college-like campus, as we talked about, really having that be a community and a continuum of care with choice. So really having different levels, and being able to go up, and also if needed be, they can step back and get a little bit more support. Low barriers, not low expectations. And we also had a large conversation about sober living. So what does that look like? What are the different levels of that, and how can this be a safe space as well as be low barrier for folks to come in, children and families? And also, again, we did talk about the cost as far as, personnel is very expensive, peers or full-time professionals, what does that look like? So that's a little bit of a quick overview of an hour and a half meeting. So I'll pause there and see if anyone has any questions or any additional comments. Jim, it looks like you.
Yeah, thank you. And again, thank you to BDS, and thank you to all of you for joining these series of meetings. This is, as we said, really important work. I think and I think this is accurate, Milay. You did such a great job of overviewing this or reviewing it, but many of these are broader than what came out last meeting. They came out over the course of over the series of the meetings, and this is the content to the report. And I think some of it is going to be one, again, as said, we want to know, is this accurate? Did we miss anything? But some of this may be a section in the report that says themes and just identifies how do you have a safe space that may be sober living, vis-a-vis how do you make sure that it's low barrier, not too restrictive for young people. So somebody's got to make those decisions. We're a couple of years away from getting on that ground level, but I think the purpose of the report will be to make sure whoever picks this up, when it comes time, they sort of have a blueprint, if you will, about what are kind of the big decisions. So I just wanted to add that, and I think I'll talk a little bit more about the report in a bit. I don't want to totally hijack this part of the section. So thank you, Milay.
Yeah, and thank you, Jim, for that clarification. That was very helpful. John, I see your hand is up.
Thank you. I just want to make the observation that I really love the process and the input and the participation. I think early on what we discovered is that the size of the need and the urgency of the need is gigantic. It's absolutely gigantic. It's overwhelming. And there's need at every level of the issue. But I think understanding that not all things can happen in every place, and really the hard work of looking at this as an opportunity and understanding sort of what would this be best suited for addressing doesn't mean that we are answering the full need. I don't think we're gonna answer the full need, but there is a unique way in which this opportunity could serve a very specific part of it. And I don't know that we're seeking a solution to everything, but I think there's a really great opportunity to do something very unique and special for a part of it.
Thank you for that, John. Yes, and I think you brought up a good point. We can't solve it all. So, it's really great to have this meeting to figure out what can we narrow down, like what can we do, and those specific pieces that you're talking about, as far as it's a very big piece, but what can we do to get that would be extremely helpful with these programs, so I appreciate you saying that. Okay. Do we have any other questions or comments?
Well, again, I'll jump in. I'd like to nudge the group a little bit. Like, do you feel like this captured what we have been talking about for the last 2-hour meetings, 2-hour meetings, a fair amount of time that you've invested in this. Is there something that we missed? I know we had a meeting with folks from lived experience, and so they can either chime in here, but I know they have some things to say when we get to, if we had to prioritize the next section. But I just really, I mean, this is important. I really don't want a bunch of calls when the report comes out saying, hey, you missed this. We dedicated this time specifically to do a temperature check and a reality check with you all.
Great. Again, thank you for that, Jim. I'm going to call Marissa and then Emily.
Yeah, I have found these conversations so honestly inspirational. But one thing that I think was brought up in an earlier meeting that has been circled around but not made as explicit as I'd like it to be is truly being a healing centered program, because that goes above and beyond just being trauma informed and how the program is developed. So if we could make sure healing centered is also called out, that would be great.
Thank you for that, Marissa. And I know we're just the beginning of the meeting, but if you have any also, I think that can go in many directions. So if you have like very specific points on like what that looks like or what that means compared to what we have here, that would be phenomenal.
I have a whole book I could send you.
Like a novel book? I don't know if it's not a book club. I don't know if we can do that. But if you have maybe some points or whatnot, I think it would be a good conversation. You know, and I think that really captures what we're talking about as far as the continuum and really having a community within this space. And if you can, if you have ideas to add that healing piece within that enrichment piece, that would be really helpful. And I think that would be something that would be great for the group in this project. So if you have a list, that would be great, or just some ideas, would love that. And you can also put it in chat as well, up to you.
Okay. Yep.
Perfect. Thank you. Emily, I see your hand is up, and we'll go Emily and then Scott.
Before I get to my thought, I think sometimes it gets confused what I said in this meeting versus like just the prep meeting, but I think I mentioned in the prep meeting, like maybe it could be wellness and enrichment center. I like the fact that Marissa said something about healing there was other language that we're doing, and I'm in a different project, but we really outlined like that the needs of youth include holistic as well, and like just it includes a lot of different things. So I just wanted to say like maybe wellness and enrichment, if healing is not a word that's in there, wellness. And then I lost it. I just wanted to say I really liked the youth engagement team chosen by youth. I know that's probably something that one of us said, but especially me, I kind of beat it to death, but I really, really like that, that you captured that, because that sometimes gets lost. Like, okay, community engagement team, we'll just get together and figure out who is going to be on this team and then figure out what they want to do. And it's like, no, the youth is part of the team, actually. Like the youth is when they talk about community engagement team, youth is going to be on there. And then they choose. So they're like a captain of a volleyball team. So I really like that was captured. And that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Emily. I so appreciate that. And I just want to say that framing around wellness and enrichment center, I think that's really good and really valuable. And it's a good reframe. And thank you also for Captain Emily. And also thank you for elevating that piece around youth team chosen by youth. I think it's really important. And thank you for elevating that and bringing it up. Thank you. Scott, I'm going to go ahead and call on you. Feel free to unmute.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate all the work everyone's been doing on this, and excited to see kind of what comes out of this. So I think it was last week, had the opportunity to actually go out and to see the buildings, which really brought it to life for me, and allowed me to really like kind of visualize what both the campus and these specific ones that we're talking about kind of look like. And so one thing that, and I don't know where this fits in, so feel free to edit wherever. But really, like I think we have an opportunity to really do a progressive process for people, because not everyone is ready for permanent housing. Not everyone's ready for transitional housing. Not everyone's ready for shelter at times. So looking at that and really thinking about how we can use these buildings to like even demonstrate a different approach. Like maybe one is really focused on that kind of permanent supportive housing. One is focused on transitional, we have a drop-in or shelter kind of like situation. So I think there is a lot of opportunities to like really even test some things out. So to pilot some and what we may find, and this often happens in housing, is this isn't the right thing at that time for the community. So like being also flexible and open to, okay, we need to change this to bridge housing, or some other type of housing, or a new intervention, new innovation that we haven't tried at a community. So I think that's one thing that I would like to highlight in this, is like the flexibility of changing the model, and not that we're stuck in it has to be this. And so I really appreciate, John, you speaking of, we can't do it all, nor should we. But I do hope that we can be innovative as a community, and really rethink the way that we've done services for so long. So I really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Scott. And we can start thinking of those things when the few years as this starts to develop. So thank you. Emily, I saw perfect. I knew it. Okay.
I wasn't sure if I wanted to say, I had forgotten it. I was like, and we had passed the subjects. I wasn't sure. But another thing I wanted to say is I think like I'm still learning, because I'm about to be peer certified peer counselor training. But the whole point of peer counselors, of putting those in there, is to promote that healing and self-care, because they don't do therapy. They don't do like advising. We're not going to tell people what to do with their life, but we definitely encourage self-care, encourage wellness, encourage resources, things like that. And so that would definitely incorporate that healing. And I love what you put in the chat, Marissa. I'm going to check that out later, because that's something that I haven't heard of before. But that's another thing that I really liked, is how they captured. And I wouldn't say, I mean, full-time paid peers, I think like full-time, part-time, whatever that looks like it depends on how much work it's going to be, I think, but paid for sure. And making sure that I think there are other support providers at the team. I will say professionals like peer advocates, I think I think they should be considered professionals. If they're going to be a peer support counselor, they are a professional. So I feel like just the language on like saying supported by a professional, or maybe this like supported by other community providers could be better. But also if no one else agrees with that, then just don't listen to me at all. But that's about it.
Thank you so much. And no, you are very, very vital to be here. So we will always listen to you. And we really appreciate your voice on that. And I like the framing around what does the language look like? And I hear what you're saying as far as professional. And I think it's good to really pay attention to that, as far as, saying maybe a licensed healthcare, provider, I think. And that actually, I think that's how it originally was. And I think maybe I just switched that up, but I just really want to honor that and really respect that. You're right. Paid peer advocates are professionals, and really paying attention to that, just those small pieces. And that really does make a difference with power dynamics and language. So thank you for that.
I just want to jump in there. As I was responding to Daniel, and I 100%, I think I wrote the word professionals eventually to get it on this slide. So I totally hear you on that, Emily. I just wanted to go back, and we were going back and forth in the chat. Daniel, you were asking around the summary. The list is sort of like a more summary level takeaways, and then the right is exactly what was captured in the meeting. I don't know if you want to speak more to the point, because you wanted to tease out that one-stop shop, and you said you're thinking about John's comments. So if you want to just speak on that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I think that my main concern is I wouldn't want this to turn into just another area for supportive housing. I think, touching on what John was saying earlier, I think that we have a really unique and special opportunity at Pack Tower. And I think we are touching on it, right, by listing out peer advocates and whatnot. But I really want to make sure that the housing at Pack Tower is a safe space to grow and to heal and recover and all that sort of stuff. And so I think the networks and the organizations close to Pack Tower and at Pack Tower gives us the opportunity to kind of create a safety net, if that makes sense. And I want to be really direct about that. Just because, again, I don't want this to just be another site for affordable housing. I think it could be a lot more than that.
Thank you, Daniel, for elevating that. And there was some talk about that as far as, what does that look like, partial 24/7. And I appreciate you, clarifying that just in case anyone else had the same question. It's great. Let's see. Is there any, before we jump to the next, do we have any additions, any questions, points of clarity? Okay, Ishmael, I think I'll pass it back to you, and now you get the fun framing of the recommendations.
Thanks, Milay. And yeah, thanks everyone for jumping into that. And yeah, exactly to what Jim was saying. We want to be sure that we're appropriately and accurately reflecting the sentiment of what this group and the members have said. So appreciate things like that, Emily, of like, let me make an adjustment on an importance on the language. And Marissa saying there's this really important piece that we was carrying through. So we want to know those things so that to Jim's point, not just in sort of the jest of like, don't phone calls once the report is out, but really to be able to be like, yep, that has been carried through. So what we wanted to do now, it's similarly in sort of a reaction kind of piece, but and this is still going to continue to be in development, but essentially the way that the charge of this group and sort of the final product is this report. The report will have recommendations. In a lot of other work groups or committees that folks might have participated in, we facilitated several. A lot of times that recommendations section is trying to get to something very specific and perhaps something where there is like really strong consensus. So you've got recommendations that are like, fund X by this amount for this, it's ultimately around something very specific. The way that we've kind of organized this process, and I give a lot of credit to Jim in this regard as well, is wanting this to be an expansive and creative process. And so there's this both and, to the point that John Kim was making earlier, which we have time for in this meeting, actually at the end of this meeting, to like, and as you were just saying, Daniel, like what's the unique opportunity, and like let's start to like direction. But we also, I think, and hopefully others agree, don't want to mischaracterize someone picking up this report and saying, oh, we saw, library, that means that's what the group wants. The group wants a library. That is part of a conversation around enrichment or wellness and enrichment, for example. So what we wanted to do is start to present how we are planning of framing a lot of what's been the conversation in the form of recommendations, while at the same time not having them be overly prescriptive, so that there isn't a recommendation that says the Pack Tower campus should have a library, but rather said it could have a library, but what's more important is the group feels strongly about X, Y, and Z. So we've taken a shot at this, and the purpose of this is to, a lot of it will feel similar to what we were just talking about, but really trying to be a little bit more succinct on if there are, 4 really top important things, 5 really top important things for these different themes, what are they? And so we want to make sure that that's really what we're having you all react to, is sort of this, like what's rising to the top. So essentially we're framing these themes as recommendations with the acknowledgement that there is a lot more that has been said, and all of that will be in the report, but to satisfy what is needed as far as recommendations. And there's things even immediately as we were just talking in that report out that I was thinking of. So one, this is not necessarily a recommendation, so to speak, but a really big important theme is exactly what's just being talked about. This says there's value, and it sounds like there's unique value. It's like this campus should be used to help address gaps and needs in the system at a like focused point. There's a unique opportunity here, which is what we were just talking about. So I think it's an important thing, especially going into like legislative sessions, to have uh, essentially the confirmation and the validation that yes, this is something that's important, and exactly the way that folks were just talking about it. I think if I could adjust this in real time, it adds sort of those points around unique and really making a meaningful impact at a certain part of the gaps in the system. So again, not acknowledging that you can't do it all, but there is real value, and this should be something that is pursued beyond sort of that overarching high level, just like round of support. The report we've talked about has these three different components. So there's recommendations around housing program model, service array, and costs. And in the latter part of this meeting, we'll have me like asking some specific questions of sort of, okay, if this way, then what, or if that way, then what. But we've heard on the residential side of housing program models, the importance of having it be essentially staffed. The staffing is a really important part. And there is an important, I'm going to kind of jump, I should have put these points closer together, but that staffing or that personnel, it's important that there's sort of this relationship and that peer relationship especially. So ultimately looking towards a recommendation that is elevating this exactly the way you said that, Emily, of like youth are a part, the young people are a part of the sort of operations and sort of a part of keep and holding things together, whether that's on the like engagement team side, whether it's on the sort of personnel staffing side, et cetera. So it's like taking all of those points that you'll have said and boiling it up to like, if this group could recommend something, it's recommending that sort of peer youth involvement, sort of the staffing level, operations level is critical. And then there's a number of different things as to how that could look like. Another one that came up that we've heard as far as a theme is really the importance of choice and individual choice, and understanding that there are different parts of the spectrum and the continuum. And so there's a question, and we'll talk about this in a bit. It's like, well, ultimately we might say that this is more tailored towards sort of this independent living, sort of this growth, I guess all of its growth, but this independent living compared to folks that are either in or just recently out of treatment. There's a distinction in sort of what those programs and services might be depending on that. But nonetheless, it feels like a high level thing that is boiled up is this piece around choice and giving young people the autonomy to decide, sort of, even down to, we had a conversation, like even down to like the super micro level of like what paint is in the room, what kind of light is best and to feel most comfortable in the room, all the way up to like who you're living around and what space and what environment. So there's this really important like peer involvement in we can call it staffing, but really peer involvement, this really important piece of choice. And then this last bullet really gets to something that we've also heard around we're using the word here caution, but really being smart or mindful about acuity. And that, again, that different level of the spectrum, as John Kim saying, the need is substantial. In that first meeting, when Mile was reporting out that maybe there's been sort of a, I don't want to use the wrong word, but there's a lot of attention sort of at that high acuity level, and that's appropriate. But this can be a really unique opportunity and a really unique focus. So wanting this to be a launching pad to the next best place. So it feels like this recommendations around that sort of launching pad being very specific and deliberate around that level of acuity, having peers involved in the operations and making sort of the day-to-day experience, and this piece around choice feel like important kind of pieces that would be, we could call recommendations, with a lot of things coming underneath it. as it related to service arrays, again, there's this flexibility and talking about, well, shared versus permanent. And again, we can have that conversation today when we're talking about priorities. But a big thing, and a lot of those what I just said is related. A huge thing I think we've taken away from our end, from our team, is this like idea, this like college campus sort of culture feeling, like, and Mile said, like this sense of community. And again, that can then get into level of specifics of saying there's a lot of different resources and services, like a college campus type of idea. You've got a post office, you've got a place to do your laundry, you've got a place to make phone calls, you got a place to print documents. And without necessarily saying that the campus should have exactly those things, just painting that picture of this sort of collegial campus-like feel as sort of a priority level as a recommendation. On the cost side of things, we've been having this conversation. I know Jim has had several conversations and conversations with providers. This group had had some good input the last time that we met about this. This one is a little complicated because we've talked about, and Jim can speak more to this here in a moment, of it's hard to pin down like ultimately like a number, and numbers are very complicated, especially like context for, you know, where we are now versus out in the future. So cost is going to be dependent on priorities, but understanding again sort of that investment, some of the biggest investment pieces, that personnel. So personnel is going to be a big important part of like sort of the cost drivers. And for an example of that is, for example, licensing. So all of these kind of flow and sway with the depending on what ultimately the direction of the campus would move towards. So if we're talking about um, okay, we have focus on high acuity over 18 in a lot of areas, maybe this campus looks at a different sort of population or different part of the continuum, then it would sway what some of those costs are. It would sway what some of those other pieces that we've talked about are. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is start to get and share back with you all how our team has been synthesizing everything that we've heard to boil up to be able to write recommendations that essentially reflect that level, and also make sure the report captures everything that Mile shared and that you all have shared as well. Jim, if you want to add on to that, please do.
Yeah, thank you. One, I likely misspoke, but really the licensing requirements are mostly for under 18, and that's what drives the cost, just to catch that. And I just want to say thank you to the providers who both allowed me to have conversations with you about how to capture this section, and who have shared that they're willing to share budgets and what it costs to run a 24/7 that's fully staffed, et cetera, et cetera. So this one is a little more complicated because also we don't know what the cost of living, we don't inflation, like who can predict what's happening in 18. So again, we want to make sure that the legislature and who's ever picking this up in 3 years knows that we know what the main cost drivers are, and the configurations of housing models will drive the cost, because we hope to get some operational dollars from the state that helps offset the cost. And some of these may be contract driven. Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
And then thank you, Jim. One other addition I'll make really briefly, just based on what we were talking earlier. I think there's an important piece here around that safety and that safety net that you spoke about, Daniel, and others. So, you know, really making sure that that's a place that has that support, whatever, you know, all the providers that are there, sort of that community, that network, is really making that sure that that is a safe place. And so that safety has a lot of different components to it as well. So that's probably and that's tied a little bit to Marissa with the sort of healing centered. That's probably another level here that's missing right now from what's on the screen that we can include. As John Kim, I see your hand. Just before I go there, I think this meeting probably didn't like tee it up that way, is really a lot of this like reflection of like, have we captured these things appropriately? Because what's going to be coming next is putting this all and organizing them into this report. And we want to do the best sort of service we can in making sure that there aren't things lost in translation, and things are really at that level of that sentiment. So as it relates to recommendations, it's really this like boiling up to like, this is really the critical piece. So John Kim and then Emily.
Thanks, Ishmael. This is perfect in terms of the idea of the concept, and there can be specifics given as examples. We're not saying that this is the thing, but this is one way in which to achieve, this concept. I just wanted to speak quickly to the service arrays portion and tying it to the cost. It is possible to cite services that are focused not only on the residents in the quarters buildings, but also serve the population that's coming into affordable housing on the other side of the campus, as well as tenants and neighbors. And so the bearing the cost, right, the operational cost could be shared in a way that's a little different, especially if something like Quarters 10 building is utilized for a suite of different services that not only are there for campus residents, but also could be outward facing. And again, this is a way of creating more of a community feel, but it would also help with regards to anticipating what operating costs would look like if these were in fact services that were not just dedicated solely for those in the quarters buildings.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I think it. Yeah, Jim, you kind of wrote out what I was saying. I was just about to say and think as well. No, you're completely good. I was thinking that as well. It's like that's an interesting idea, and I wonder how this group would think about that, because it makes good sense as a pitch if this part of the campus and these buildings are going to be connected with the other housing that's coming in. If the group feels, or if we're ultimately talking about something that is more insular but still a community feel, then that would change it. But I think it's a really good idea to sort of put on the table, especially when needing creative ideas to come up with how to get the money together. I see Emily and then Greg.
Okay, so I wrote down a bunch of stuff but I will condense it to talk on John's point, just because I'm using a lot of my notes just because I use a lot of, I'm a resident advocate for youth and young adult apartment complex, and so I use a lot of what I've been experiencing here, but expanding it for it. So what we've experienced in the whole community supports, just to see whether or not, like for instance, the one community support that is like it's my favorite is there's a licensed mental health counselor that is free to all the residents, that is regular and can come to us and is really great. But two things about that. One, it is open to community members, specifically youth. And like I had one of my friends who works with me who had some housing instability. She doesn't live here, but she is able to do that. But it was referral based. So I would say, like, to make sure that the licensed mental health counselors aren't actually, and the social workers aren't overbooked, and that the youth are being served, to make sure that they are being referred, so that there's like, okay, I can take someone on my plate versus I can't. I have too many clients right now. But I do think that would be good in some capacity to bring in, to lower those costs. I just want to say that. And then to talk about the residential housing, like partially or 24/7 staffed, that essentially, yeah, I like that. But then adding the peer advocate and the housing, the staffing is the same thing. So that might actually cause less costs, because we wouldn't essentially need someone there all the time on top of someone who would be living there, because the residential advocate, peer advocate would be living there. So essentially, like I do. So they would be there, and there would be protocols. There would be a job description. There would be, which is a live document, of course, live document, I love it. There would be, check-ins with the residents if they choose at the duration or occurrence of that's appropriate for what they want in their schedule. Maintaining tasks if there's not a maintenance person. We don't have money for a maintenance person, so we take turns making sure trash is on the curb every day. I mean, if it's a bigger place, it wouldn't really need to worry about that. But either way, that's the idea with that. Condense those two ideas into one, and you would get two birds, one stone. what else? And that it would be youth, just to make sure that would be a thing, because of course, if they're going to be living on campus, and I don't mean youth as an under 18, because that is a little, I forget that the youth is different definitions for everyone. I'm 25, almost 26. I still consider myself a youth sometimes. And people, they still see me as like this versus like, you know, like, oh, I need to be on my P's and Q's because Emily's coming. Like, I mean, they do, but not as bad as like our landlord. Like they don't, they walk away from her. Either way. Then I wanted us to moving forward. I really loved the independent living compared to in and out of treatment, like the priority of choice. I see I love I know we can't have all different types because we can't afford to like do that, but I do see the idea of having levels so that people know like there's something to work up to. So I like, you know, just some motivation, behavioral momentum. If they see someone living on this level and it's like, I don't know, it's motivation when I see others and I'm like, oh, this is attainable, via action steps or whatever. So that's one thing. And then, the last thing I'll say is just on the service arrays, the office-based model shared, can we put and permanent? Because I see, I'll tell you why. We have a resource center that we used to use that would be able to be used for anything. We could use it for events. We could use it for, my landlord met people to meet grant funders, you know, the licensed mental health counselor would meet people there. But so that was shared, but sometimes it would overlap. So I think also that health wellness and enrichment center, or whatever it's called, that it decides to be called, would be like a permanent thing where like license that social worker, that LMHC, a peer counselor, recovery coach, whoever that's going to be involved in that would have their own offices that they could meet clients in if they so choose, but also would be able to meet them out in the field if need be, because that's what we do. We meet people where we're at, where they're at. So that is it. Sorry for taking so much time.
No, I think you figured it out. I think we should just have Emily. I'd like yeah, you know, to embarrass you with the captain of the volleyball team. I can, I like that. I'll definitely have you captain of the volleyball team. One thing that I want to go back to what you were saying, Emily, before we go over to Greg, that I thought was actually, yeah, it was really, because you responded to John Kim in that sort of that question of the, you know, should services be open to community broadly, and sort of that's really balanced with that safety piece, which I think is a really delicate thing. And I think that's an interesting experience that you all are working with sort of that referral system for other youth, but making sure that if there are going to be either full-time providers or even part-time providers, that they are dedicated to the people living on campus. That's very important so that it doesn't get bogged down. So, but that referral system is a good way to also bring people in that maybe ultimately might end up also living at the campus. So I just wanted to elevate. That was a interesting idea. I saw Greg Williamson's hand up.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can.
Awesome. I'm driving, so my apologies about road noise. First of all, thanks, Jim, for inviting me to these meetings. And this is the first one I've been able to make. So it feels like I missed all the cool stuff in one way, but it's also great to just show up and have you ready with your recommendations and principles and description and vision. And it's exciting. And I like the campus idea so much. And then when John was talking about services available kind of on campus and to the community generally, and people may know about all of these already, but there are several different examples in other places, one of which is up in Vancouver, British Columbia, called the Britannia Center. If people haven't heard about it, it's been around since 1970. I think it's still there. It could be gone, but it's a 16-acre site with a public school and a library and a skating rink and a swimming pool and a senior center and youth centers and homeless services and health services, mental health services. And it's owned by 7 different partners: the city, the county, the municipal government, different nonprofits, and everybody owns the same site, and they all get one vote on capital stuff or operating stuff, and they all figure out how to have a social compact so they can work together. And just as you describe the campus and both the things happening for the young people living there on site, and also how do we blend it with the community around it. It just sounds like you've got such a wonderful, holistic, and sort of, community-centric vision. So I just wanted to offer congratulations and at least one other example out there.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. And thanks for that. Yeah, an example as a reference. Jim, do you want to? You want to just talk about the theme that you shared in the chat there?
Oh, thanks. No, I was referencing Greg's comment that I think
Mhm.
one I'll look at the center, but it's also a great theme that I heard come up a lot is what should there be on the campus centric and what should we, utilize of the community resources.
Mhm, mhm. Great. So, and yeah, thanks, Aaron, for sharing that example in the chat. Greg, Aaron just shared the Britannia Center in the chat for folks to reference. So I think this is really good. This is really great. So we talked about sort of this high level around choice, continuum, independent living, peer involvement. This is a really unique opportunity. And then hearing this other theme as we're talking about sort of that balance of sort of inward or campus specific versus community resources, and what's sort of on versus not on, and how residents, tenants, or other community members, maybe other young people, are engaging with that. That feels like the sort of the big bullets, in addition to some of the other cost pieces. Jim?
Yeah, I'm going to put Emily, and I don't know if there are other young people on the call here, but we had a great planning meeting yesterday or the day before. And Emily, I don't know if it was your idea or not. I could express it, but I'd rather just prompt you and see but there was some talk about having a resident youth and young adult kind of overarching advisory or governing committee that sort of helped establish. Go ahead. As soon as you know what I'm talking about, please take it.
I think I know. Yeah, I think I kind of just mentioned so when it comes to coming to, so I'm a resident advocate, right? In theory, I work alongside and with my landlord. I get the feedback, I do the things with the residents and bring it forth. Well, sometimes I'm feeling slightly like it's not being received well, the feedback, or that even if it is being received well, things are not happening. It seems very pointless. So just having more people than just the landlord or whoever is in charge of the building and the resident advocate bringing forth the feedback and advocating for these residents, there should be more involved in how things are actually going to change, there should be a board or something with youth involved. I mean, I'm not saying it all has to be all youth, it would be great. But definitely to get it started, I mean, would need some more players. But I think that there's some value in that. Just in the sense of, it could be even residents, because what not better to figure out if these programs are working than to get the feedback from the residents. So essentially, I created a survey that was a Google Forms, and I thought I could just create it and send it to them and they would just take it, and then I'd get this feedback, and it didn't work out that way. I had to actually meet with them and be all right, so let's talk about these questions. And I had to stimulate thought and because when you think about it, when you ask them, oh, what could make this better, they can't think of anything. But then when you're talking to them in conversation, at least when I can so what I'm hearing is 3 things you could have said. So I don't know if that answers your question really, but I don't know if it has to be a board or just having youth having a resident, or just, which would be a youth or a family or whatever, at every level of decision making. Because it's great, I'm coming to a point where it's this is coming to a board and then it gets shut down. So, and then then I get discouraged, honestly, because it's okay, I'm doing all this work and there's no systemic change happening. I'm like stagnating at a level. Jim, is that what you were trying to?
Yeah. And the reason I thought that was so important, we talk sometimes about this like the program, but the truth is there's going to be many different organizations on this campus. And so it's not just one entity. So I do think there'll need to be something more, even if it's a campus meeting, but I really love the idea of sort of putting young people in charge of that. And this is too much in the weeds probably, but it could even be that there's like, before you kick somebody out, they come before this, or if I did something against the campus, there's a restorative justice sort of thing. So I just thought it had so many potential, but the notion of just starting with some kind of overarching advisory committee that maybe every organization that's on there has representation of, young people have it, maybe even the community or other, the PAC Tower or the North Side, like it just felt like a really smart idea, Emily, about how do you bring folks together and decide what, it'll be what it is the first day, but what if someone wants to change it 6 months from now? Do they just get to do that on their own, kind of thing? So I just really appreciated that idea.
Yeah, I agree that was a really good idea. I saw a lot of head nods and thumbs up. I'm curious, I just sort of pose it out to the group. Is that something how does the group feel about that as far as moving forward with it? I'm seeing thumbs up. Where said also supports the idea of real community. Aaron, thumbs up, 100%. Liz said the youth advisory board at some of the children's long-term inpatient programs, and they are in charge of full components. They're over at the store. They over the store at the facility, manage the funds, advocate for gender-neutral bathroom options, etc. So, okay, we can make sure that that's included at that level too of this, and it gets to that, like, youth are involved at every level, like you were saying, Emily. I was thinking about it at sort of the peer operations piece, but then you brought up this really important part around decision making as well, and governance, which is an important thing. To your point, Jim, the sort of coordination. So if folks feel good about that, like I just saw the approval for, sort of boiled that in up at that level of a recommendation. Okay, Greg, and then Emily.
So thanks again. This will be brief. Jim said two things that were wise and wonderful. One was about the importance of young people being involved in the design and delivery of every aspect of the program, and how do you manifest that? The second one is there will be lots of partners on this campus. I've seen something work at some of the schools in South Seattle, White Center in the past. I thought was really cool. There were so many volunteers and so many programs that the school felt overwhelmed, or the young people felt overwhelmed. And so I think it was City Year at the time, came up with a staff person who essentially just did air traffic control for services available on campus. And that might be another thing where either young people or another organization with young-ish people or whatever, somebody just to organize volunteer efforts, just to organize service array, just to organize transportation offsite or things coming onto the campus, in terms of you've got so many partners and so many players, to have something that's just about coordination might also be something helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Emily.
Thank you. This might be actually we are kind of segueing into this. I had like some things that I just like had on my mind that I wanted to include, just in case I didn't already say it, on what could be provided as like community supports. Just at something that I wish we had here, or that we do have here that works, whatever. So like things that we have, like a licensed mental health counselor, obviously it's like kind of contracted with the place. So essentially that would be on site. A social worker would be an essential recovery coach, things like that, in that little wellness enrichment center, health, wellness and enrichment, or whatever that's a big name, but whatever. I think sexual health and wellness should be like a thing. just having some like an office that's dedicated to like spreading the awareness of that and like dating violence, you know, just like things like that, like birth control, just harm reduction for that, for sexual health, basically, as well. And just like all of that stuff, just all of the things that they could potentially use if they needed, or if they needed prenatal care, or if they needed vitamins, or if they, I don't really know, because I'm not a mother, so just anything that anyone could need that would fall in that, as well as maybe classes, like if you wanted, I know that there's like pelvic floor therapy and things like that. Like there's like lots of just random stuff that I didn't even know about. Probably people don't know about. So that's some stuff that is really big. I don't know if anyone knows about Recovery Cafe. There's one in Seattle. There's one in Port Townsend. I don't know if it's just like a place that has free food basically. And I'm not saying like it has to have a Recovery Cafe, but a model like it where specifically I took a relationship skills class. It was a 6 weeks workshop series, and it just really opened my eyes on like, it was like how to set boundaries and how to negotiate. I mean, obviously I'm still working on it, but like it gave like exercises and interactions and stuff like that. So like that could be something. And then, yeah, I really do like what I think it was Greg who said something about volunteer efforts and like coordination on that part. I personally would love to get involved in a lot of stuff in my community, but one, it's not started. So it's like, I can't just join something. I have to start it. And it's like, I don't have the time to do all of that. And I, you know, so having someone to either start or coordinate or jumpstart or facilitate would be great in like volunteer efforts philanthropy. That's literally it. Thank you. I have to jump off, but I appreciate your time and I'm so sorry for talking so much.
No, don't apologize. Appreciate your time, Emily. As Amelia said earlier, value being here. Thank you so much. Okay. So I just wanted to say, so it feels like we've kind of getting more or less on the same page around some of these boiled up recommendations. Again, there are tons of different like specifics or directions that lead up to those things that we want to make sure are also in the report. But it feels like more or less in a place where people feel comfortable with moving forward with some of the things we've talked about as far as at the recommendations level. Greg, I don't know if your hand is a new hand or is a lingering hand up. Lingering hand.
Sorry about that.
No, you're good. You're good. Okay. With that said, I want to move us on along, but I think I got decent sort of head nods of that feels good. Okay. So I want us to move us along, and I'll pass the floor over to Mile again. So we're going to be talking about in the report a lot of those different ideas and specifics that people have thought of, sort of underneath these boiled up recommendations of what, you know, I think Greg, like you said, like really important principles almost, like these are really important principles. But at the same time, I want to use a little bit of the opportunity to talk a little bit around sort of this idea space around priority, especially as it relates to funding. So we'll do that, and then we'll talk very briefly here at the end of the meeting about the report structure. But I will pass it to you, Mile.
Thanks, Ishmael. As Ishmael was mentioning, you know, we're talking about this funding, and it's in a couple years. We don't know, you know, necessarily what's going to happen in the next couple years with it. So we really wanted to touch on a key piece as far as like prioritizing funding. If you want to go to the next. So we were thinking, okay, blue sky, we get everything. However, let's say we got partial money. So let's say we receive partial funding, and I'm not going to throw out a number. I'm just going to let everyone think of that themselves. I'm not going to let anyone hold me to that. So really thinking about what should we prioritize. You know, we heard a lot about from folks in the third meeting about, you know, young people leaving treatment or who are in treatment, and really talking about what do the levels look like within that and that housing. And then, or should we be focusing on more independent living? You know, there was talk from the very first meeting about, you know, acuity and high acuity, or do we want to focus on independence? So I wanted to pose a couple of questions to you. So if partial funding was received what should be prioritized. So for the first one is which housing model is most critical. And you don't have to pick these two. These are just what the themes that we heard a lot from the first meetings. And then also within that, what programs should be elevated. And I see, Jim, if you want to go first, and then I'll do Bridget and Marissa.
Thanks, because mine's not a recommendation. Mine is more helping, I think, set this. And I wish Emily was still here because it was her comment yesterday, but it was so profound that I think it's important to have as we think about this prioritization. So she's talked a lot at this group about she lives in a complex where she's the resident advocate, but she does live there. And one of the comments she made that actually I was like, wow, this is what comes from someone who's on the ground floor. She said that they were in such a hurry to get people housed that they put the housing in before they did those office-based supports. And that in fact, people feel really isolated in the housing, like they are on this island where there's not a lot of coming and going. It's however many residents and apartments there are. So I just, as we think of this, I just really thought that it'd be good for the group to sort of have that notion. There's almost a question of, do you start with the services and then bring in the housing, which to be honest, I would have intuitively went, of course, do the housing right away. But she really did talk about, they've had some significant problems, health problems meaning crisis, because people feel so isolated and they don't have those services close by. So I just wanted to throw that into the mix.
Yeah, thank you, Jim, for that. I really appreciate you sharing that. We'll do Bridget and then Marissa.
Forgot to unmute me. I think these are not or statements. I think these are very much could be and statements. People leaving and or in treatment and independent living. And I know you want to prioritize. And my other question was, are we just talking about the capital funding here or operations? And then my last comment in what Jim was talking about and what Emily had brought up was, why not have, as far as the direct care staff, literally you build housing with office space in it for those that are going to be providing the direct care for the case managers, people like that. And they're actually then located in the housing. I would never assume that you just build an apartment building with no space, office space for the young, for the people that are going to be working with those young people. That would, that doesn't make sense to me at all. And having only like all the service staff huddled in one building on the campus. They should be located in however many buildings you end up with. They should have space in all of those buildings. They should be on site, at least during business hours, and easily accessible. That's all I got for now.
Thank you, Bridget. And thank you for that. And you're really talking about having it not be an or. If we're going to have these things, you have to have all those element and different pieces in it. And you asked about funding. Is this the capital? I was thinking more with that type of funding. And yes. So I appreciate you elevating that and really kind of putting that to the forefront as far as, you know, what needs to be in there, whether it's the offices, what programs. Yes.
Jim, your your comment in chat is actually sort of where my brain went. I when the slide popped up, I kind of wanted to nitpick, and I do very much want to nitpick the framework of partial funding, because more often than not in legislative world, we can do things in phases, right? And so if the report is written from a phased in approach, I think that the vision for the property needs to be taken in a potential long-term plan, right? Like we all know how enthusiastic Representative Chop is to get everything available, but the reality is the money is not necessarily going to be there to do everything at once. But the vision can still be achieved over multiple years. And so I love the call out of the services needing to be in place to really sort of ground and connect, right? Because the reality is, like, both capital and operating dollars are probably going to have to be phased in. And so I would love the report to reflect a phased approach to this really beautiful vision.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for the clarification. And thank you for the comment, Marissa. Erin, I see your hand up, and then we'll do John.
Yeah, I was just curious. I know that there's some sort of, we've had some discussion also about how might the community receive this. So I'm intrigued by the notion of, perhaps if some of the services would get phased in first. I wonder if any of the like practitioners or service providers in the group would have thoughts about whether that might be advantageous at all in terms of allaying community or neighborhood fears. Do you think there's any more risks or outcomes that you might anticipate with or different kinds of outcomes like that you might anticipate with services versus housing versus doing it all at once? It's a question to the group.
I was just going to say, yeah, if anyone, John, we'll get right to you, but if anyone, any providers on this call and meeting have any comments to that, feel free to unmute. And I think that's a really good question about, what are the possible risks or outcomes and that we could anticipate, and how would that impact the project. So if anyone wants to unmute before we go to John, feel free to do so.
I would just respond with, I think it needs to be both. The or is what's driving a wedge in things. I think it needs to be both. Even if you're going to do a phased approach, we'll then just start with one small project with the services attached to it, another small project with the services attached to it. It's not an or, it's an and.
Do we have anyone else that wants to chime in? I saw a thumbs up. Well, John, and then Greg.
Thanks. I was just going to say that this was never about just putting bodies in beds. This was always about creating a safe place where people could come in from a certain level and then move on the continuum to the point where they no longer need the services and that they move out. And so the idea of doing a either or runs counter to that. I think when residence begins, services have to be in place because the goal was never to just house them. The goal was to support them and house them and to move them to help them develop and grow and support them that way. And so if we had picked sort of a starting point for the level of acuity for folks that had the highest needs, and we decided that that was, let's say that it's taking folks who are being discharged from inpatient programs. Like if we said that that was the beginning point of the continuum and that the other end of the continuum was that they are no longer needing services and they're ready to move out, then I would think that if you prioritized phasing, you would start with that starting point because they're going to need support and they're going to need to be in place for some period of time before they're able to move to the next level. And so you sort of build it before they get there, thinking of it in terms of a cohort and recognizing full well that it's not linear, right? And that it doesn't always just flow in one direction, but at least it gives you a logical way to describe the vision and to be building in a logical way toward the final outcome.
Great. Thank you so much, all. And I just want to say, you know, this is the best part about having these meetings is when you all react to something and really give your input. And it really sounds right now that, you know, we're favoring a phased approach. And that sounds like that would be, so far what I'm hearing is the phased approach in co-locating. And feel free to push back if I'm saying something different. But that's what it sounds like to me here. Greg, go ahead and unmute.
Thank you. Just want to second phased approach. Second, how Bridget talked about you can't have one or the other. So starting on a smaller scale with both. I'm lucky to have gone to a place, we're talking about campuses. I'm lucky to have been a resident advisor in the campus housing at the Evergreen State College when I was an undergrad. And a couple ideas from Evergreen that we should steal if you want them. One is the idea of a disappearing task force that shows up to solve a particular problem and then goes away. So back to the ideas earlier of does there need to be an advisory board or does there need to be this or that? All those things would be great and wonderful options, but also sometimes you might just want to pull some people together for a short period of time just to deal with the next phase of the problem and then have that structure kind of dissipate. Second thing is when Evergreen got started, I think it was authorized in 67, didn't open until like 71 or 72. And it opened with, you know, dirt campuses that hadn't even been, you know, there weren't even lawns planted and stuff. They were already offering college classes. But a lot of the other stuff was there at the beginning, all the wraparound kinds of services. The community had already been built, the principles on which it stood, the the social compact of who's going to be here and why do they need to be here and how are they going to create the place. Evergreen's not unique in that. There's a lot of other places that we've seen over the years start up, and that startup phase can be really important. But to get the vision and the principles and the social compact and the community built before you even lay one piece of concrete or whatever, that seems like a doable thing. And then phase in is phase in of the manifestation of a community that already exists.
Great. Thank you, Greg. I really appreciate that. And what I heard was, you know, having a task force there when need be and really having within those different phased approaches. I'm going to, so again, I'll just say again, before I pass it on to Ishmael, it sounds like the group is favored into doing a phased approach with co-locating services. So that is something that we can just definitely add in. And what I heard loud and clear was that as we move within each phase to always have the services attached with the programs. And, you know, I really appreciate that. And if there's any additional comments, feel free to unmute. If not, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on. Jim Theophilus.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry to be the mosquito. You can bat me away at some point. But I guess I do want to take a process check again. What I heard is not that the group is recommending we do a phase in, but if we have to do a phase in,
I was going to say,
then blah, 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 blah. And that's the combination of services and housing.
yeah, I was going to say the same thing that, yeah, that was that point you wrote there, John Kim, as well. It's like, wouldn't it be nice? It's like and that was Mile's question. It's if, you know, we have the blue sky, which we maybe let's not call it blue sky. That's plan A. And then if, then this is how the group forward. Thank you all. I'll echo Mile of like, yeah, this is why this group has been so wonderful to like jump on something with either, you know, really good ideas, really good pushback and thinking. Okay, so thank you all so much again for your participation in this. We have one last piece. This is just really to give you all some context of what's happening. This is essentially part of we can almost think about it, the what's next. But I wanted to just give a really brief description of how this report outline is kind of currently being construed and conceived, and the places in which all the stuff that this group has shared will find its way in that report. So this is current thinking around the structure of the actual document. I think a lot of this is common, almost template from a lot of the documents through the Department of Commerce. And really just to be able to share this narrative. So having an executive summary, sort of an introduction, a background on the quarters buildings, on the campus, on the need for services. We talked about that at the first meeting and a little bit today. To talk about the process in which these recommendations really elevate the who of the participation here. I'll make a note here, Jim has said this before, where we'd like to be able to include people's names that participated in all of these work group meetings. If for a particular reason you'd like your name not to be included, please let us know that. You can do so now or let us know by email. So a summary of the process of this work group and the involvement, and then those recommendations. So those recommendations sort of boiling up at those different levels. And then I'll point here in a second to invite Levi to speak a little bit around this thinking about the relationship. So you might remember in the graphic of the process, it's like there's the programming process and then there's the capitals process. And so how those two things are speaking to each other and find themselves in this report. And then next steps. This was part of that conversation of this like priority piece and sort of the prioritization. I think we'll see a lot of that in the next steps and what's necessary to be able to make this vision come true. Before going over there to you, Levi, I just wanted to essentially highlight almost every single part of this report is going to be a kind of direct reflection of the work of this group. We'll be doing our work to put together a tight and tidy summary and sort of introduction on the legislation and the background, sort of the statutory pieces. We'll have some background and some good writing around sort of the campus and context, but the summary of the process, the recommendations, all the specifics that folks have talked about, and then some of these next steps around the prioritization, funding, the phase, all of that is going to be entirely made up of what we've heard in this group. So that's how we're going to be translating things over and tying them into this final report document. Jim says, no surprises, like to make a couple of comments. So I just wanted to highlight that again. We don't have the actual report yet drafted, but that's how we're going to be pulling things in and pulling them through into what will likely be a structure like this. The structure might change slightly, but ultimately this is what we're trying to move towards. Before going to Jim, Levi, I wondered if you could speak a little bit to the thinking around how this report might speak about the relationship between the capital operations and what's being envisioned so far for that part.
Yeah, thanks. For people that didn't know, I've been listening in the background along with Don Bushnack from the capital side. We've just been taking in what everybody's been sharing, and we really appreciate all the thoughtfulness. And we're going to try and put together some studies that actually kind of show this idea across how it could work across the buildings in terms of a footprint. If you've ever seen a floor plan, I think we showed a little bit of this up front. This came out of our capital report that we provided before this, where we took a stab of what the layouts could look like in these buildings to help us understand what improvements needed to be made. And I think we can revisit those with all the information that we've gotten here. I think there's a lot of great input on, even ideas about independent living and, people wanting sort of this control over their environment in terms of color and lighting. Those are things that have capital implications in the improvements of the building. And so we'll note that, and we will try and put together some diagrams that are legible to people other than architects that hopefully really help everybody to visualize what we've been talking about and how it could apply across all of these different buildings. So look forward to that. I always like to give a words of heads up. These are going to be conceptual, so none of these floor plans are are set in stone by any stretch. So when you see a room in one place, you think it should be in another, it may very well move again. We're really just trying to take a first crack at it so that so we have an idea what it's going to cost, and hopefully, avoid as much phasing as possible.
And I'll just say thanks, Levi, for sharing that. Our team and Levi and Don and the Capitals team is going to be meeting, I think, next week to sort of put heads together and like, okay, what did we hear, and to sort of tee Levi and Don and their team up for doing exactly what Levi just said. Jim.
Thanks. Yeah. And I want to thank Levi too. How great to have a partner that's got all that technical ability and is aligning it with what the vision of the community is, as opposed to saying, this has to be this way. So thank you very much for your partnership. I just want to remind folks that on one level, the report is us responding to the legal charge that we received through the proviso. So, and that's those areas you see that, those are the areas the proviso calls out. So on one level, this is us responding to that proviso. It will be on the Department of Commerce report once it goes through their whole process. We worked hard, all of us, BDS, North Star, Aaron, to advocate to make sure or get clarity around. So when we turn this report over, does Commerce change it and do all this fancy stuff, including content revision? Or is this really reflecting what the work group came up with? And I want to thank our Commerce and Office of Homeless Youth partners as well, because I think in spirit, they really are saying, nah, this is different than what we usually do. We usually have a report, and then we get to kind of change it up depending on what our uppity ups think is best and what we want to recommend to the legislature. And instead, this time they are respecting the fact that this report is not what Commerce thinks. And I said I appreciate them and respect them. I genuinely do. And yet it is true. This report is about what did the work group want to say as it relates to housing model, service array, operation costs. So doesn't mean we get everything we want, but it means the legislature will hear what this work group said unfettered. That said, it does go through a Commerce process over to Office of Financial Management, OFM, ultimately to the governor's office and to the legislature, which is why we're advised that an executive summary is important, because a lot of these busy folks are not going to read the full report. So what's the what that you really want to take away? And it really challenged us, which is why I'm glad BDS is supporting this work, to really have clear themes, have clear recommendations, and have clear challenges. So I just really want that context for folks. I do also want to say that this report, besides doing that legal piece, I'm viewing it as an advocacy tool. How are we going to use this report to convince legislators that they ought to invest in this building? It's a ton of money, 35 million, I think, is what the projected remodeling costs are. That won't be probably all state funds, but what's the chunk they can give? And then someone will go look for private dollars. North Star may or may not be part of that, but this is an advocacy tool that's going to convince people why this is a good investment, not only for youth and young adults experiencing homelessness, but for the whole community, for the whole statewide effort to prevent and end youth and young adult homelessness. So along those lines, one of the things I've already asked some of you, but I'm asking all of you now is, one, as Ishmael said, if you don't want your name or organizational name, let us know, but we sure hope we can use it. You came here and invested a lot of time. We want to show that there's statewide, thank you, Bridget and others from outside of King County, but we need a strong King County response. So thank you all for that. If you're willing to, we would love to receive some quotes from people, not only how good looking Jim is, but mostly why you think this is an important project, why this will help prevent in youth and young adult homelessness for our community. And so I think in the report, we want to have some of that lipstick that we can sort of put in there. And then the last thing I'll say is we are sort of assuming, we're anointing you all as part of the advisory board. So that, again, it obligates you to nothing other than you'll receive an email saying, hey, there's a hearing. Can you come testify, or can you sign in and support about the capital budget? There may be some invitations. There's going to be a big neighborhood engagement process going on. There may be some of you that are comfortable and want to go to a community neighborhood and say why you believe this is important. So I'm hoping that you will all be, if you don't want to be on that advisory board or council, please let us know. There really is, it obligates you to nothing other than when we put out a request, you consider that specific request. But it's a way to keep this group, the power and the passion of this group, to sort of get more mileage as we go forward once the report is conducted. The last thing I say, and I promise it is, I think one of the things that are going to be added in the contents of this is North Star Advocates is going to have a section of its own that where we can reinforce what was said, but we may also be able to go a little farther and really be a lot more direct about some of the themes and recommendations. And I think we agreed to that, Ishmael. If we didn't, then you can correct me. But again, I don't think it'll be anything provocative for this group. It'll just be drilling down on a couple things and making it probably some lived experience quotes and letting them have a couple sentences about why they think this is important, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you for the time, Ishmael.
Yeah, Jim, you said everything exactly that needed to be said in this moment. So much so I'm gonna pull off the screen share. That's essentially it. That's what we wanted to come to this meeting with. Wanted to get a lot of reactions and on reflections to make sure that we're moving things in the right direction. I feel like we got a lot of support for that, and also got some really good refinements and specificity on language. Some make sure this is really important. Like, so I from our perspective, I feel really good around coming away from this meeting feeling equipped to put together the document. And as Jim said, yes, it's a both and. It's a, we have to do this, and it's going to be beneficial, obviously, going towards the legislature. But then it's a narrative of this process and the momentum behind it that can be used as a tool in advocacy for this particular future and other things like this. So so I wanted to just give a moment here to allow anyone really the expression of gratitude. I'll start before we wrap up, but just again, really appreciate everyone for their involvement. I've really loved the way this group has been so sort of fluid and open, but at the same time, everyone is really sort of keyed into what collaborative solutions are. I feel like as a person who does a lot of facilitation, I might have said this with this group a lot, you can be in a lot of spaces where it isn't really a conversation. People kind of come off mute and say the thing that they want to say, and then you have a bunch of disjointed thoughts. There's been a lot of really good collaboration and sort of moving in the same direction, even though people have a lot of different perspectives. So I really appreciate it to be a part of this. But yeah, I'll open the floor if anyone wants to express anything else as far as either questions or clarification. And there's a question, Marissa, you said, is the report and include material from the pre-development assessment from SHKS, thinking about how we didn't really talk about things like the need for elevators, but it is very important. I'm curious if Levi can speak to that, or sort of the like product of what the capital side of things is going to look, because this was really around the housing programming and services. But yeah, go ahead, Levi.
Yeah, so we have a whole other report. It's 600 pages. It's very, but we try to sum it up in about 40. It includes things like elevators, the need for ADA units, specifically based on, the requirements by Washington State. And we did also note that, there may be a higher need amongst this population, this kind of housing. Because this is pre-designed, none of those requirements are set in stone. They're all suggestions, and they're all used to sort of reach that 35 million number that Jim was mentioning, in terms of that's what it would take to renovate the buildings fully to kind of provide every requirement, which is fire sprinklers, things like elevators where necessary, updates to finishes, seismic improvements. So I don't know what the availability is on that report. That report will be coupled with the report that the operations team is putting together here from this conversation. So all that will be going to the legislature together. But I would have to ask Kim Justice and Jeremy Walker how other people access those reports. And I'll make a note of that because Marissa, I know I've seen you on an email with Kim Justice before, so.
Yeah, I have the 630-page document up on
There
my
you go.
computer right now because I love floor plans.
Really good question. That helped. Anything else that anyone else would like to say or ask or flag, express, exclaim? John Kim.
I just want to thank the facilitators. This was a great series of meetings. I always felt like we knew what was being discussed and why. And I felt like we were all given an opportunity to really bring what we had to the conversation, and everyone was honored. And that's not easy to do and still keep us on time. And I walk away from this just in much appreciation for the skill and the preparedness, and making sure that this is a great experience for everyone involved.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that.
Well, I'm in that spot where I want to make room for others, but I don't want you to close it because I also want to say just a ton of thank yous. This felt like such a manifestation of who our community is in terms of coming around the needs, and not just, as Emily says, not just for them to survive, but thrive for the young people that we serve. I also want to thank BDS for being such great partners and facilitators. I want to thank the Office of Homeless Youth for entrusting North Star with this work and for their partnership. And really those of you, as I said, who came statewide, as well as who are in King County, for really showing up and stepping up. And I really, of course, want to thank the young people with lived experience who not only added so much to these meetings, but Milay and I had a couple meetings with them before these meetings so that they did feel like they were centered and knew what was coming before the agenda was put out, and could really be thoughtful and test stuff out before they put it in front of the whole group. And so, and then, often we forget, but I want to thank our system partner agents, DCYF, again, OHY, Healthcare Authority, all of the folks that are just so busy and get stuff thrown at them all the time, but to take the time and spend all of this. And of course, I think Aaron Hathaway, who I often say, if I get any credit over these years, it's surrounding myself with brilliant, passionate folks. And Aaron's been an example of that throughout the years. So I'm just thrilled. I think this is going to be awesome. And we are not done yet. So thank you, Ishmael.
Great. I'll let anyone who has a burning desire.
I just had one call out because I have loved these meetings. I truly have. And I also want to give credit to the facilitation because I've been in a lot of spaces where the creativity has not been facilitated in a way that it's expressed. And just you can throw whatever out and so really just have enjoyed this process, but also knowing that this could be a multi-year journey. I hope that there is a way to keep this group and the vision that this group has created centered so that it doesn't get lost, because I've also been in lots of work groups, right, where you create this beautiful thing and then everyone just goes away and no one's really around anymore once it finally comes to fruition to say, oh yeah, that's what we created together. So I hope that part of the advisory group that was mentioned is also like a multi-year, let's make sure we keep this going together so that it does turn into what we've created.
Just real quick, I'd like to say thank you to this group and the facilitators as well, just for giving an authentic platform to lived experts. It has been really impressive to me throughout this like the series of meetings that lived experts have been listened to and engaged in a very authentic way. Usually it's kind of just putting them on the speaker and letting them say their thing and then just letting them walk away, and then nobody's really taking anything away. But I can tell that this group has just been really intentional about inclusion, and that means a lot. So hopefully that sets precedent.
Ishmael and I have this unmute thing. No, thank you everyone for saying that. And I just want to also elevate Bridget's comment. There's always Zoom, Bridget, where folks can have their happy hour via Zoom. So there's always options statewide. There we go. But this has absolutely just been a pleasure, and just being in this space with all you smart people, and it's been very humbling and just a great experience. So thank you for the kind words. And, we're looking forward to developing this report with the Department of or giving it to the Department of Commerce, and really seeing where this takes off. And it's just been such a great process for us as well. It's just been, so thank you. I just want to say my thank yous and really appreciate you being here.
Amelia has the last word. Thank you, everyone. We'll adjourn, and yeah, we'll definitely be in touch. Appreciate you all for your participation, and hopefully we'll see each other soon. Take care.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.